I have a concern that the skill and knowledge base, both within the civil service and within the ministerial pool, which I look at with horror, is not capable of actually holding the public's corner. And the problem is, when you have a very able private sector, which is effectively exploiting a very unable public sector, that the net cost falls upon the consumer.
So on the question of public ownership, I think ministers have been very clear, and you'll have heard the Secretary of State in the House yesterday, that ministers don't believe public ownership is the right answer. Estimated cost of nationalising the sector of the order of £100 billion, based on our estimates, and we've published a paper which I can direct you after the session if that's helpful. Because
you've got a mismatch between the capability in the private sector and the capability in the public sector, I'm afraid. And everything we're talking about now is over-complex. So my view is, I mean, when things get too complex, it ends up being a pig deal. Forget all the papers and the structures and the plans. It ends up being a pig deal between the regulator and the private sector. It just inevitably does. So I'm just worried that with all this mess, now is not the time to have an uncertain situation. I think you were due to have this report out, was it in September? And you're hoping to have this structure out in January? It was January. I mean, when are we going to see it?
The white paper.
I've seen there's a white paper, but when are we actually going to have a firm structure so everybody knows what's happening? I think that the Ofwat is dysfunctional. I think the DEFRA is dysfunctional. I think the Environment Agency is dysfunctional. I don't know about the Drinking Water Inspectorate. So put them all together, you end up with one big mess if you're not careful. So I think we want to know that the consumer is being looked after here, and that the private sector isn't going to further take advantage of what I think is a mismatch in capabilities.
On your question about capability, and Sir John Cunliffe had a long, hard look at this, and you'll have seen his report published summer last year. He did recommend we need a regulator with a different set of capabilities and move to a different model of regulation with a much stronger focus on supervisory regulation.
But when are we actually going to know what the structure is and who's going to populate that structure? When are we going to know that?
So we're intending to set out that level of detail in the transition plan in the next couple of months.
And then we can judge whether they're up to the job.
Obviously, what comes next is legislation, and I can't preempt the King's speech, but to do this well, and the scale of reform we're talking about, you need primary legislation for a number of these reforms.
Thank you, Chairman. We need this structure and the people as soon as possible. And it doesn't fill me with great confidence to hear there's a whole load of legislation that's got to be passed first. That sounds like a long time to me.